This week on Capital Connection, Election Day is here and it's time for voters to decide the future of the country.
Raleigh, are we ready to do this?
Well, thank you very much, North Carolina. You are a special group of people.
Here in Illinois, Democrats are trying to grow their supermajorities, but Republicans are trying to chip away at some of that power.
I feel reasonably confident. I have to say, all the polls would indicate that this is a race that's neck and neck in almost every battleground state.
We break down all you need to know with our Reporters Roundtable. Joining us this week, it's WBEZ's Alex Degman and the Chicago Tribune's Jeremy Gorner. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol reporter Cole Henke is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Cole Henke. All right, everybody, we made it. Election Day is just a couple of days away, and candidates spent all week giving their closing statements. Here's a little bit of a wrap-up of both the national campaign trail races and the ones here at the state level for what you should be looking out for on Tuesday. Candidates are giving their closing statements all over the campaign trail, including candidates for president.
It's either going to be him or me in the Oval Office.
You can't lead America if you don't love Americans.
While all eyes are on the top of the ticket, several key races down the ballot will lay out the roadmap for the two state parties going forward. National politics may be split evenly, but in Illinois, the power lies with the Democrats. Republicans spent the year talking about chipping away at Democratic supermajorities, but now that it's crunch time, experts say they are just trying to hold on to what they got.
Republicans are going to have a hard time taking advantage of them, and they're defending 4 districts the Democrats are spending a lot of money in.
The key races to watch: the 104th State House District race between Republican incumbent Brandon Schweizer and Democrat Jarrett Clem. Democrats are trying to flip a seat in a part of the state typically viewed as a Republican stronghold. And in the Metro East, Republican Kevin Schmidt is trying to fight off a challenge from the same House Democrat he upset in 2022. Former Representative LaToya Greenwood has the full weight and financial support from the Democratic Party to try and get that seat back. And then for Congress, you have the 17th Congressional District, where Congressman Eric Sorensen is trying to hold on to his seat against Republican challenger and former judge Joe McGraw. Republicans need high turnout from their base to win these contests, but UIS Professor Emeritus Kent Redfield says it's unclear what kind of support will bleed down from the top of the ticket.
You always have drop-off, but you assume that if you've got a lot of enthusiasm for a candidate, you're going to get good Republicans out there. That's going to bleed down to the lower ballot races. That's not necessarily true.
Democrats have a major cash advantage across the board as well, with Senate President Don Harmon having 9 times as much cash to spend as his Republican counterpart, Senator John Curran. And House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch has 10 times as much cash as Republican leader Tony McCombie.
The Democratic funding base is very strong, even without Governor Pritzker. The core groups, which are labor unions, both the trade unions, education unions, and public employee unions, are all very, very strong.
Governor Pritzker has poured plenty of money into Democratic races too, but he is also focused on driving voter turnout across the Midwest. He says he is confident in their efforts, but knows the presidential race will be close.
To be honest, I think it's good that everybody's a little on edge, on both sides probably. Having more people vote is better for the country.
When we come back, we turn to our Reporters Roundtable to break down some of these key state races and talk about how the national campaign trail could affect Illinois. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We now turn to our Reporters Roundtable. Joining us today, it's Jeremy Gorner with the Chicago Tribune, Alex Degman with WBEZ. Thank you both so much for joining us. Wanted to have you on to talk about the just election in general. We're going to focus on a lot of races today, hit on a lot of key topics, but just broadly, I'm not going to ask you who you think is going to win the presidential election. I don't think anybody's really in a position to guess that. But what's going to be interesting is seeing how the voter turnout, where the voter turnout is, and all of this impacts these state races. We know presidential elections drive turnout. Jeremy, I'll start with you. Who do you think benefits the most from a larger turnout in an election year like this, where finances are so heavily favoring Democrats and obviously the positions those parties are in are so different?
Well, definitely Vice President Kamala Harris got a boost in financing after she declared her candidacy for president. So she had the momentum there as far as financing goes. I mean, Donald Trump's used up, a lot of his campaign cash and has had to try to come up with different ways to raise that money, despite his billionaire status. But at the same time, as far as who has the advantage, I mean, Cole, it's not to use the cliche, it's too close to call, but it really is. I mean, when you look at national polls, one day they swing towards Trump, another day they swing towards Harris, and in terms of getting a local perspective, even when you ask the Governor Pritzker, who's been a surrogate for Kamala Harris, I mean, he is trying to put on the most positive face that he could, but acknowledges that it's going to be, basically indicated it's going to be a nail biter, and that the blue wall, the so-called blue wall of these battleground states, is going to be crucial. That's why Democrats have put in, especially locally, have put in so much time and energy in Michigan and Wisconsin. But Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, it goes one way or the other with those two candidates. And I think even in 2020 we didn't see anything like this. But at the same time, polls get criticized for being inaccurate. I mean, this will be another test to see how accurate they truly are, and that's going to depend on voter turnout. We've seen a lot of Democrats, and we've seen, like, in terms of like early voting, you see Democrats really come out in favor of that, generally. But it's just so hard to say in those battleground states who's got the edge right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tight polling, and I don't think I've seen a poll yet that shows one winning outside of a margin of error. Like, it's that close in all of this, and these polls have those sort of built-in hedging mechanics where they're like, look, this is what it says, but we could be wrong in that position. It's so tight. And Alex, I'm interested because I know you've been focusing on one of the bigger congressional races here in Illinois. It's going to be fascinating to see how that 17th congressional race particularly plays out. It's not in the spotlight as much as it was in 2022. Illinois is not seen as this huge turning point for that House majority as it was with both the 17th and the 13th back in 2022. But that's a strong candidate they got running, that Republicans are running against Eric Sorensen. He's got the background for it, and he's sticking to the national Republican message. It's probably not going to work out that well for Trump in Illinois, but that particular district, to see if McGraw can kind of pull off that upset, will be really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because even though you're right, Trump is not necessarily popular in Illinois as a whole, that is a district, the 17th, which, even though it's drawn for Democrats, it is becoming a little bit more conservative as time goes on, because even though, as I just mentioned, Trump is not necessarily popular across Illinois, he is popular with white folks, with working class folks, and there are a lot of folks in that district. So it really just, it kind of depends a lot on turnout, like you were saying. It just depends on where in the district we are going to find people coming from. Are they going to be coming from the urban areas, the college towns, or are people going to be really incensed to vote in the rural areas? So yeah, like you said, I think it's going to be really interesting to see.
It's been fun to watch Sorensen kind of walk that bipartisan tightrope in such a tough House, tough Congress in general. It's so divided. It's been so gridlocked, and we've seen that from both of, I guess, who you would call the more vulnerable Congress members. I don't know if you should put Nikki Budzinski in that camp as much anymore. She's up for election this year, but she has such a huge financial edge, and we're not seeing the Republican Party fight as much in that district as they are in the 17th.
but it's been the past 2 years, they have focused so heavily on that bipartisan, making sure that Republicans might like us too. And then to see it kind of still be hit by that national campaign messaging of, vote Republican, Democrats are bad, just kind of sticking to that kind of balancing point there. It seemed so difficult, Alex, for that 2-year period there when almost nothing was getting done in Congress.
Yeah, and that's like not only do you have to be a bipartisan Democrat to get something done, anything done in a Republican-led House, but that's the kind of district he's running in. He's running in a district where you have to literally represent everybody, including the people that you don't necessarily agree with. Like Eric Sorensen is trying to run a campaign that's taking people back to when Republicans and Democrats worked together a lot more frequently. Like he, one of the times that I talked to him outside of an endorsement event that he was doing, he mentioned, and I think I can come pretty close to a quote, "I am standing in the middle of the aisle." And that is the kind of candidate that you have to be to run in a district that takes in urban areas, but also a lot of rural areas. If he were to, for example, run in, the city of Chicago in one of the congressional districts there, that might not work so well because he has received some money he's actually received a lot of money from AIPAC, for example, and that's not going to really bode well in a far left-leaning district. But for where he is now, with the support for what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now kind of palpable in that district, he's towing a pretty fine line, and he's doing it not only on the campaign trail, but if you look at his assignments in Washington, he got assigned to the House Agriculture Committee. Like, he works with Mike Bost. That should tell you right there. If you can work with like a far-right Republican as a Democrat, that shows you that you're able to get things done for the district in a way that, if you were running a little bit to the left, maybe not. But not just the Ag Committee, but there's also, he's able to do some climate things on other committees that he's in, and as a meteorologist, that's kind of a big deal. So, yeah, I would say that, to try to close out my point, sorry.
All good.
So, yeah, basically, I would just say that the district that he's running in is really reflective of the kind of campaign he's running.
Jeremy, Alex, I'm not going to let you leave yet, but we are going to take a quick break here real quick. So we'll be right back with more of our Reporters Roundtable.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We are still here with our Reporters Roundtable. It's Jeremy Gorner with the Chicago Tribune, Alex Degman with WBEZ. Thank you both so much for joining us again for our second round here. I wanted to start with the state house races, the ones that are going to really affect this building here. Such an interesting dynamic because obviously Democrats have supermajorities in both the Senate and the House. And the House in particular has so many seats up for grabs. And we heard over the summer consistently from House Minority Leader Tony McCombie, we're going to get 5 seats. We're going to chip away. I think we have a shot at 5 seats. It wouldn't put them out of the supermajority, but it would at least show a little bit of growth for that Republican Party. This week she kind of hedged her bets. She's like, I think we're going to hold on to what we have. And Jeremy, I'm just fascinated at how that shifted and sort of how we've seen that reality of where the Republicans stand right now, because we obviously knew the seat counts, but now we see the financial differences and the map, and it's going to be a really uphill climb here for them.
Well, a couple things, Cole. First off, Tony McCombie's goal has been, look, obviously we're not going to make a splash in this election cycle, but maybe little by little in this election cycle, 2 years from now, 2 years after that, what have you, we could try to make some gains little by little, and then basically roll the dice in 2030 when there's going to be another redistricting opportunity. Who knows what the makeup of the General Assembly will be then, right? I mean, that was kind of what she had her sights on, aside from making some of these predictions about how many, or making some of these declaring these missions on like how many seats they want, the Republicans want, and so on and so forth. But you also have a couple other things. I mean, the Democrats in the General Assembly just significantly outfund the Republicans. I mean, and it's pretty insane. I mean, not just the House Democrats campaign arm or the Senate Democrats campaign arm, but the state party has thrown in money. They also have Governor Pritzker and unions throwing money into candidates. And also, if you look at House Speaker Welch and Senate President Harman's campaign coffers, I mean, just, you know, it's in the millions. I mean, it's just a huge disadvantage that Republicans are there. And then you have the Donald Trump factor. Donald Trump lost Illinois in the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections, each one by about 17 percentage points. I haven't seen any polling that shows that that's going to change in this time around. And, you know, I talked to one political expert about this, and, you know, what the question is, could that have an impact in down ballot races? And this person told me that it very well could in some of these swing districts, legislative districts, where, you know, maybe a voter doesn't know who these candidates are, and they could be kind of tagged with like a guilt by association thing, you know, because of who's at the top of the national party's ticket.
I think one of the things that also...
I mean, I'm speaking of Republicans.
Yeah, and you talked about the Trump factor on that, but I think another place where you see the Trump factor is in that fundraising battle, because the discrepancy just became so much wider when you realize that the bulk of that Republican fundraising base is gone because of almost civil war in a way over which candidate they were going to support in 2022. I mean, the governor's race ended up being a fight between the two billionaires of the party, and then both of them ended up getting washed in that race. So now you see Elizabeth Uihlein donating still to Macomb. She's throwing some money her way, but by no means as much as what was done in the past. But the Ken Griffin and Richard Uihlein, Elizabeth Uihlein campaign fund of the Rauner years is just not there anymore, which when you add Pritzker to the Democratic side, it just makes that so incredibly wide.
Just completely lopsided.
Yeah. And that on its own just bleeds down to these local races where you see, Alex, there's the 17th, or not the 17th, I want to talk to you about the congressional race again, I'm sorry, the 104th, the 104th House district race is like the perfect example of this to me, because this is a district that has pretty much all of rural Champaign County. It's like Champaign County outside of Champaign-Urbana. And then it goes over into Vermilion County and gets Danville. And this is a seat that was held by Mike Marin and held by Republicans before him. This was a red district, and obviously it got redrawn, but that has been known as a red area of the state. And now you see just hundreds of thousands of dollars getting poured into this Democratic candidate that has, you know, been a college the Parkland Board of Trustees member, Jarrett Clem. He's not been in the state house, but he's union backed and he's state party backed. And he's just flooding in money against this incumbent candidate, this up-and-coming veteran that has taken over a seat in the state house, and the Republican Party just can't match that kind of output that the Democratic Party has in that seat. And it very well could flip. I mean, I haven't seen any strong numbers, but Democrats certainly feel they can win that seat. And it's just so interesting to watch those kinds of areas that used to be locks be up in the air now, and how the power in this building translates to that on the ground.
Well, I think I think you just pointed out the overall theme that I think Democrats are trying to go for here, and that is that, at least in the House, the so-called Great 78 isn't enough. Like, do they try to make it as Jeremy was talking off the air, do they make it the Great 80? Do they make it the Great 82? And that would be a lot. That would be a lot of Democrats in one chamber. But I think the race that you're talking about, the Jared Clem and Brandon Schweitzer race, it's kind of indicative of what Democrats have been trying to do for the last couple of cycles. If not Democrats themselves, then certainly, like, for example, the unions that back them. We saw a really big challenge from the unions last cycle against a couple of the Freedom Caucus members, Adam Niemerg and Blaine Wilhauer, and it didn't work. The unions poured in $250,000 and it didn't work.
Jeremy, like I said, I want to go to you. The suburbs suburbs have been the huge talking point. It was the talking point in the Rauner-Pritzker race.
Sure.
And it's been consistently, we've seen in the Donald Trump era, the suburbs go further and further blue or show out more for Democrats, which has been just terrible news for Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, so the Chicago suburban races, I mean, there's some that are very interesting. I think the main one that I'm paying attention to is Dennis Reboletti, a Republican, spent 8 years in the General Assembly. Once was in House Republican leadership, wants back in. Marty Deuter, who's a City of Elmhurst councilwoman. So this is a district that is primarily situated in DuPage County. Now, DuPage County, when you think of a long-time bastion of Republican politics in Illinois. Pate Phillips from DuPage County, former Senate President Pate Phillips, Republican from DuPage County. Former Republican Congressman Henry Hyde. I mean, these are some big names that really defined politics in that part of the Chicago area. It's really become purple over the years, and even outright blue.
Jeremy, Alex, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Cole.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Now, before I let you go, I'd like to leave you with one more message. Throughout this election year, I've tried to help you better understand not just the names on your ballot, but also the larger issues of this campaign trail and the consequences of your potential choices. And I hope I've done that. I hope you feel better prepared to head into that voting booth on Tuesday. This is an incredibly divisive time in our country, and that is not going to change on Wednesday after all the votes are cast. But I hope when you go to vote this week that you are kind to your fellow voters, you are respectful of the election workers that make democracy possible, and above all else, I just hope you vote. That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week, where we will break down everything that happened on Election Day. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Hankey.